Our next speaker will be Major General Suzanne Vares Lum. She was commissioned as a distinguished military graduate in the Military Intelligence Corps on May 15th, through the ROTC program at the University of Hawaii in Manoa. She currently serves as the Mobilization Assistant to the Commander, U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. In this current position, she has a key role in the Indo-Pacific Command's effort to shape and maintain regional security through development of diplomatic, economic, and military policies. This includes building and maintaining military-to-military and political military relationships among 36 nations within the Pacific region, covering 51% of the globe. Please welcome Major General Suzanne Vares Lum.
Thank you, Carlos. Aloha mai kako! Aloha. To all our distinguished guests, our veterans, and our spouses and our families who are here. What an honor and pleasure it is to be here this morning. You know, we got a lot of veterans on this island, and you are here today representing. And I know that next year, it's exciting, Carlos, to have this year. 2 years. We're gonna get this place packed. Because as I understand, there's over 100,000 veterans on this island. Pretty significant. And when I look at the crowd, I can see these hats of various organizations. Amazing benefactors and people at heart, Anthony. Just hearing that story about Mr. Cohen. Wow. And I know there's so many out here that I've talked to that care about our veterans, their families and their spouses. That's why you're here today, because you care. And those of you who are veterans, you're here because you have a passion, you know what it feels like, so you want to help others. So I'm glad to be here among you in this awesome place, the Convention Center. You know, and on behalf of Admiral Davidson, our U.S. Indo-Pacific Command Commander, and the 377,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen who serve in the Indo-Pacific region, as you heard Carlos, it goes from the California coast all the way to the west coast of India. We call it Hollywood to Bollywood, polar bears to penguins, 52% of the Earth's surface, 36 nations. Pretty significant, and we thank you today. When I told our leadership that I was gonna come today to represent Indo-Pacific Command, to thank you for your service. Thank your families and your spouses for their service. You know, as was mentioned, I currently serve as a mobilization assistant, and the region that we're in today is pretty significant in that we have the largest country, China, the largest democracy, India, and the largest Muslim country that is a democracy, Indonesia. Most people don't realize it. We hear about it in the Middle East, but Indonesia is such an example to this region in the world where democracy and Islam are side by side together, which I think is incredible. We are also home in this region to 7 of the 10 largest armies, 5 of our 7 bilateral treaties, as well as 5 nuclear declared nations. Pretty significant. But even more so, our national defense strategy has indicated that we in this region have 4 of the 5 security challenges. North Korea, as we all know too well here in Hawaii. China, the rise of China, and Russia in the Eastern Military District. Also violent extremism through Southeast Asia, and now we've seen South Asia with Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. And of course the 5th that is out of our area, but is in the news today, Iran, which sits in the Central Command area of responsibility. So a lot going on. All of these security challenges that we face today, but also in the past, as I look in the faces here, you know those security challenges we face in the past has required, as you know, trained and ready forces that are able to deter our adversaries who want to do harm to our homeland and our interests. So it's been you in here, you and your family, the few and the proud, who have answered the call to our country when we needed you. And I think it's important for events like today to acknowledge you, but also, as I talk to Carlos, your spouses and your families. We talk about the veteran, but But I think today we need to talk a little bit about our spouses and our families. You know, as of 2017, and it's always difficult to cite quotes about veterans in a crowd with all the experts, but my latest research shows that 112,000 veterans call Hawaii home. And about 10% of the adult population in Hawaii are veterans, which is higher than the 6% national average. So you veterans in here have served World War II, Korean War, Vietnam, the Cold War, the Iraq wars, the Gulf Wars, and Afghanistan, and around the globe, really countless places, because currently we have hundreds and thousands of service members across 140 countries around the globe, which we don't even talk about, that never show up on CNN or Fox News. But you all are very aware of that. You know, many of you have been in the most remote locations that most people don't know where it is on the map. And you've been on land or on seas or under seas or in the air, defending our airspace, our seas, and our lands. In the most austere conditions. And some of you were drafted and you answered the call, and thank you, because that wasn't always the case. And today, many of you have volunteered, because we currently sit with a volunteer army. But what that has caused, as you probably know this statistic, and an important reminder, is that less than 1% of our American population serves in our nation's armed forces today, and that's active guard reserve, which has put our nation's requirements on the same population, repeatedly and sometimes generationally. I just had some wonderful conversations where Cece and his daughter, yes, is a corporal. Generationally, we've seen this. We've seen almost a military caste system, because this is what they know. Your child, your grandchildren, and it's probably many of you in here know what I'm talking about, or your father or your mother has served. So this also means today that many of our families experience multiple deployments. And since the past 18 years of persistent conflict in the Middle East, some have had 9, if you look at these stripes. Some of their stripes are filled all the way up their elbow. And this includes, again, all of our service components, the active guard and reserve. No time in our nation's history have we had to rely on the guard and reserve to deploy in order to meet all of our national requirements. And while service in the military and the deployments are no doubt tough, because every one of you in here has a story, and some tougher than others, particularly our Vietnam veterans and our Korean War veterans who have come home and didn't have the welcome. But you know, all too often, talking with Carlos, we do not acknowledge the service and sacrifice of our spouses and our families. So I really want to take a moment to just thank anyone in here who's a spouse or family member of a veteran, if we could give them a round of applause. You know, the military is a large organization with over 2 million in all of its branches and components. And over the past century, our leaders have learned that we have a moral obligation to care for our veterans. And sometimes we've done this well, and sometimes not so well. And that's why many of you are here and contributing. But one point is for certain, is that over the years, we could do better in acknowledging and supporting our spouses and families of our current military members and our veterans. Many spouses of our military veterans have had a unique status and experience that most of our American population do not understand. You know, oftentimes they've had to be both parents, knowing that their spouse was absent for key events, birthdays, anniversaries, sporting events, rites of passage, emotional swings of your teenagers, aging parents, and even a birth of a child. You know, I was able to speak at the Military Affairs Council to spouses, current spouses of military members of all services. And I asked them in the room, how many of you have had to give birth, the women who were spouses in the group, without your husband being there? And I was amazed at how many raised their hand. Now, most people can't imagine that, right? Most people are not connected like you are to our veteran and military families, are like, are you kidding? Wow. You know, so it's that understanding that's so critically important. You know, many of our military spouses have had to play the role of not only taking care of the household, but also the home life. Also maintaining a job and profession, or maybe being dual military. So a lot of challenges there. But you know, over time, the way that we have viewed spouses and families have morphed, largely due to how we viewed our responsibility as leaders to take care of families. So if you think about it, in World War II, you know, there was little communication with our spouses and families, unless a service member was dead or missing in action. You know, my aunt, I got to talk to her, she's 97, and some of you, as your aging relatives, you start talking story, asking them questions. So I asked her, what was it like while Uncle Johnny was gone in the Pacific theater? He was an infantryman. And she said, you know, he served in the Army in the Pacific, but she didn't know for weeks that he was wounded until she got a telegram. And it didn't say what he was wounded of, or how bad, or how severe. He was just on a transport ship coming back, and she didn't know how long. You know, she told me also while he was off fighting in the Pacific, she was hapai, and that means pregnant in Hawaii, but she's from Kauai, so she had some complications, so she had to come to Oahu where she didn't have family. She didn't have anybody to take care of her, so the neighbor next door in the apartment kind of helped her out. And when she did give birth, my uncle never knew for months. But you know, that story is not uncommon, and many of you know our World War II veterans who have the same story. And they would say, oh, that's just how it was. What troopers, right? That's just how it was. Most people couldn't even imagine that. They just did it, and they carried on. But you know, Korean War and Vietnam wasn't any different. Communications didn't significantly increase at the beginning part of those conflicts. But at the same time, during Korean War and Vietnam, we didn't have the nation mobilized to support our veterans and their spouses. So many of the families and spouses were left to their own devices. And I don't have to look far, but look at, many of you have seen We Were Soldiers with Mel Gibson, right, 2002. You know, that film dramatizes the Battle of HIARNG in November 14th, 1965. And U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore, played by Mel Gibson, you gotta get a great star, you know, is chosen to train and lead a battalion. And after arriving in Vietnam, he learns that an American base has been attacked and is ordered to take his 400 men after the enemy and eliminate the Vietnamese attackers, despite the fact that intelligence had no idea the number of enemy troops. And we've heard that story all too many times. Not that because I'm an intelligence officer, we usually have good intelligence, but this time, not so much. So Moore leads this newly created air cavalry unit into HIARNG Valley, and after landing in the Valley of Death, the soldiers learn that the location that they were sent is actually the base camp of a veteran North Vietnamese Army division of 4,000 men. 400 versus 4,000. So you can imagine the casualties sustained as a result of that. But the Army had not set up an adequate notifying system of the next of kin on the battlefield fatalities. Instead, telegrams were delivered by taxi cab. But unlike what was depicted in We Were Soldiers, Mrs. Moore, Hal Moore's wife, didn't actually assume that responsibility. However, she did accompany the cab drivers who delivered the telegrams and assisted the death notifications, grieving with the widows and families of the men killed in battle, and attended the funerals of those who fell under her husband's command. Now, her complaints to the Pentagon and the example she set prompted the Army to immediately set up notification teams consisting of a uniformed officer and a chaplain. Now that's incredible. We can't imagine that today, but some of you in here may have remembered that. You know, the perspective of our military and veteran spouses has not been fully considered in the larger planning throughout our nation's history. You know, and as I mentioned, over the past 18 years of conflict, we've come a long way. And now many sailors are underway, and Marines and soldiers and Coast Guardsmen for long stretches of time under our new power competition in the region and the world. You know, the US military now has recognized the important role of the family. And I want to share this quote from our Chief of Staff of the Army, General Mark Milley. He said, "Armies do not fight wars. Navies and air forces, they don't fight wars. Nations fight wars. Nations fight wars because it takes a nation to win. It takes a nation to be strong it takes communities to lift one another up. If our families are not healthy, we are not healthy as a nation. We need to support one another and our communities and our nations. And in addition to that, our veterans and our families, we also need to think about those spouses who experience loss, whose husband or wife doesn't have the opportunity to wear that sign veteran because they've never returned. You know, I think those who have experienced loss of a service member need to also be acknowledged and taken care of. You know, after coming to terms, can you imagine, and many of you have and seen this, with the unimaginable news that your spouse is not coming back, and after grieving and picking yourself up, you enter out of the military community and into the community as a whole who doesn't know what your life is like. So I'm happy for events in Hawaii like the Nakoa Wounded Warrior. Some of you have heard of it. It's a regatta that happens every year. And that's one of the many events that acknowledges not only our wounded warriors, but our Gold Star families, those who have not had their veteran come home. And at last year's event, and I shared this at the spouse event because it was really moving, it was a young woman, and at this event they wear the picture of their fallen loved one on their back. And the children do too, whether it's mom or dad, and it's been a lot of dads. And she had her husband on her back. She was kind of alone, she has no children. And she was kind of standing by herself in this line, and I said, how's it going? How are you feeling? She goes, you know, thanks for asking, because nobody wants to ask me. They don't know what to say to me. They don't know what to say. They feel uncomfortable, so they just ignore it. But here, at this event, I feel like there's people who understand. So I think it's important for us to remember to reach out to those who have lost a loved one, who didn't get a chance to call their spouse a veteran. So, you know, to me, this was a reminder of what I have to do, and I hope that we all do here is reach out. You know, there's also spouses and family members. And I'm so grateful for this new initiative, Anthony, because there's family members of wounded warriors where there are visible wounds and we see those scars without the limbs, but there are also invisible wounds, the post-traumatic stress disorder. And we often don't talk about how do spouses deal, how do spouses support, how do spouses help. That's another thing I learned from that Nakoa Wounded Warrior talking to spouses. You know, I'm not sure what to do. My husband doesn't have the use of his legs or arms anymore, and it's been tough. I don't know where to get that support. And I think, you know, as veterans organizations, that's a realm that maybe that's something we could think about together. You know, as our veterans communities can help in this void that exists. And while we have and should continue to honor our veterans for the courage, all of you, and your selflessness, that you have shown by being willing to put your lives on the lines. And yeah, you came home and maybe though you suffer with those invisible wounds or survivor's guilt. But you know, when I look into the eyes of veteran spouses, I see strength and toughness. I see resilience. And while people may say our nation's strength and our might is our military, really the backbone of our warriors is our spouses, our family, our friends, and our community, this community here. So to deter aggression and defend the homeland and our interests, our military will no doubt continue to deploy and train, as we've seen in the press this past week. Threats of war, a possibility of escalation in Iran. But you know, in this region, many will continue to sail through the South China Sea or under the South China Sea to ensure our interests of trillions of dollars of trade that moves through the South China Sea so we can enjoy our daily lives and our families can. Or whether it's conducting special operations in Marawi, Philippines against ISIS Philippines that threaten our neighbors in Southeast Asia. Or whether it's providing airlift and refueling across this vast expansion of ocean to assure our allies in Japan and the Republic of Korea. Or whether it's building partner capacity of our 36 nations so that they can protect their own sovereignty against coercion. And while our military members will continue to be away for long stretches of time, it's the spouses and families who are impacted and hold up the home front. They deserve a concerted effort to be acknowledged and considered when it comes to advocacy for employment, childcare, education, facilities, housing, legal support, and also how to deal with visible and invisible wounds of their veteran. So as I close, I hope that we remember that the strength of our nation are our military and our veterans. The strength of our military and veterans is our families. Military families and veteran families are models of resilience. You know what that means. You've dealt with challenges that our civilian counterparts cannot begin to imagine. And remember that families are the force behind the force. So thank you, veterans, your spouses, and your families for your service and sacrifice. And as all of you know so well, spouses and families who are here, you will never hold someone so tightly the day you leave them and the day they come home. So mahalo nui loa for allowing me, and I hope you hug your ohana and your family today when you go home. This is an awesome summit, and I'm grateful for everyone who's put their hands and their hearts into this summit to care for our veterans and their families. So take care. Aloha.